And so part of the work, part of the good refining work of planting a sacred settlement is God saying, you can't move forward until you love these neighbors. Like, I don't think we get to overcome the hateful neighbors. I don't think we get to, step over someone to help someone else. And so before we can plant a sacred settlement there, the church is doing the really good and hard work of earning the trust of their neighborhood. And I think that is just true kind of across the board.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Up Next. Today, I get a chance to talk with a new friend over in the lovely, lovely state of Minnesota. A little cold in Minnesota compared to Chicago. Gabrielle Clowdus, how are you? Yeah. Hey, we were just talking before all of this stuff. You have an interesting background that you have. Tell me where you are in your house.
Seeing an old prepper's closet turned library. So the people that lived here before us, had the black beans and the water and the ammo. And when we came and saw the property, my husband was like, that's going to be a library. I didn't have the vision myself. I thought that we were just going to store a bunch of junk in here. But he turned a basement closet into a really sweet little library.
Wonderful. Gabrielle, I met you through our mutual friend, Larry Smith, over in Austin, Texas, who is the former CEO of Tokyo Electron. And you are the founder of Settled. Talk to me a little bit about what Settled does.
Yeah, so Settled really exists to guide the local church in cultivating home in a homeless world. And so what that really looks like is inviting their homeless neighbors off the streets and into a permanent and intentional tiny home community on their land and in their building to do life together.
Yeah. Now, how did you start that?
That's a story. I was studying international housing and international poverty. About 10 years ago, my husband and I moved to Minnesota from Southern California. I was getting a PhD in housing at the University of Minnesota, sort of one of the only PhD programs in housing in our nation. And about 2 years into the program, I really sensed the Lord say, Gabrielle, it is time to look at poverty in your own backyard. And I really struggled with that. I had spent literally most of my life going overseas and connecting with people that were living on $2 a day, and that was where my heart was. And to be totally truthful, I had a lot of stereotypes around homelessness in America. I thought, if you're homeless in America, that's challenging, but it's not impossible. We have the government, we have churches, we have social service programs. Overall, there is help. And God said, Gabrielle, it's time to look at poverty in your own backyard. And that wasn't super challenging. We lived in downtown St. Paul. I rode the Green Line train between St. Paul and Minneapolis every day. And it was really just opening up my eyes to my neighbors that were sleeping on the train and just being available to share a granola bar, to share a story, to talk with people, start to know them by name, by face, by birthday and interest, and recognizing that though as a society we say homelessness is the result of substance use, mental illness, lack of affordable housing, lack of job opportunities, really after 10 years of studying chronic homelessness in America, I will say those are just fruits of a much deeper root cause, which is a profound and catastrophic loss of family, which has led to a profound and catastrophic loss of community. So our neighbors that are stuck in homelessness, our neighbors that are on the streets for 5, 10, 20 years, they aren't there just because of substance abuse and mental illness and lack of housing. They are there because they don't belong to anyone. There are no relationships, no healthy relationships in their lives. Nobody is looking at them in the eye with awe and delight and wonder and saying, you are of great value. And every single one of us need that. Every one of us need to be, fully known, fully loved, fully embraced as we are. And we believe that this is the role of the church, and that it has always been the role of the church, but that the church has just sort of lost their way over the last decades and maybe even centuries. And we've outsourced this role of family to the stranger, to the orphan, to the widow. We've outsourced that to the government and helping professionals and social services. And while government has a role to play and social services have a role to play, we believe that that role of family is the responsibility of the church. And so we're calling forth the church to home make, to cultivate home in a homeless world, and to do this really meaningful work.
Yeah. And Gabrielle, a lot of times you start this whole community of tiny homes. How did that come about, or where was your influence? Was it through Larry, or how did you get that concept of tiny homes, and what are you hoping to do in Minneapolis through these tiny homes?
Sure. I had a research project at the University of Minnesota, and it was being funded by our largest county hospital. And the CEO of that hospital at the time had come to my mentor and boss at the U and said, "We have people that are in chronic homelessness coming into our ERs and feigning an illness because they need a bed and a meal, and this is costing us
Yeah.
$1,500 a night. This is essentially, we're operating an emergency shelter that's really, really
Yeah.
expensive." And there's somehow this loophole, or not even a loophole, but essentially our system is set up where housing is not provided, but healthcare is. And so you are not going to get turned away from the ER. And so our neighbors,
Yeah.
on a
Yeah.
really cold night when the shelters are full, or they'd, couldn't get into a shelter, they were going into the ER. And so that the CEO at the time was really interested in tiny homes as a potential solution to chronic homelessness. And he asked me to just look around the nation and see what was happening. At the time, this was like 2017, there was about less than a dozen tiny home villages across the nation. There were 6 over here, 9 over here, 12 over here. And then in Austin, Texas, there were 250 tiny homes at this village called Community First Village. And I just kind of chuckle at that. I'm actually from Austin, Texas myself, but it makes sense that the largest tiny home village would be in Texas. It's, everything's bigger there. And really, Community First was really making a statement. They were saying Community First exclamation point. And they were making a statement on the prevailing model out there. The prevailing model to homelessness is called housing first. And they were essentially saying, no, 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 it's not housing first, it's community first. Housing first just says, let's work on the substance use, the mental illness, the lack of job opportunities. But it doesn't acknowledge the profound and catastrophic loss of family. And if we don't address that, people will still remain homeless in their hearts, in their spirits, in their souls. And so how do we kind of wrap around people and augment that role of family? For them, it was creating a village where there were people coming out of chronic homelessness, and then also what they call missional neighbors or intentional neighbors. Resource people that have never experienced homelessness themselves, choosing to live life alongside the poor. And I had the privilege of then kind of shifting my doctoral research over to Community First Village and saying, this is so spectacular what is happening here. How do we bring this across the nation? And after studying that for many years, really essentially codifying a model that we call full community that addresses 5 major barriers to eradicating chronic homelessness with 5 responses. So those look like building code, zoning, social services, the social belonging, and then also purposeful work. And really, we look at these 5 things as ingredients for how do you build a really holistic model so that our neighbors that have been on the streets for, a decade or more, find a place where they're actually able to be settled and grow roots and start to build trust in themselves and with their community and with God. And that has really been our work for the last many, many years, is really kind of proving out that model.
Yeah. And what does it look like right now with Settled? How many tiny homes have you built within the community?
Yeah. So we essentially we had these really great hypotheses. We believed that any church in America, had the right to plant an intentional tiny home community on their land. And we believed this because we had found a very strong federal land use law called the Religious Land Use Act that essentially says a faith community can use their land in conjunction with their mission. So if they could show that their mission was to care for the poor, and the way that they wanted to care for the poor was creating this community, then essentially that federal land use law supersedes any local jurisdiction. And really, local zoning is the number one reason that affordable housing doesn't get built. We've all heard it, we've all read it in the newspapers, the not in my backyard sentiments of like, great idea, yes, we should help the homeless, but not in my backyard. And so we really spent time just educating our cities, educating our state on the Religious Land Use Act and how we wanted to use that, doing kind of some lobbying work there and some just education and awareness and building some momentum around that. Our first sacred settlement was planted in October of 2022. And that was just after a lot of hoops and hurdles and really kind of breaking the ground for a new way of thinking about zoning, building code, a new model of care, and really a new, maybe a new old ancient way of doing church, where the homes are on the land. Then we renovate a portion of the church building to be that common house with bathrooms, showers, kitchen, laundry. So that reduces the overall development cost so that we're actually creating truly affordable housing development. But more importantly, it's encouraging routine interactions among the church and their neighbors, and really building an interdependent way of life together. So the first sacred settlement was planted at a small urban Church of the Nazarene. It's made up of about 20 households, working class, highly diverse, in a working class neighborhood. It has 6 homes. 4 of the homes are inhabited by our neighbors coming out of chronic homelessness. On average, they were on the streets for about a decade before they moved in. And then so we're talking about hardest to house, most expensive to the public, with the least amount of options available. I mean, we are in no way cherry picking. We are going after the hardest to house, where our society has thrown up their hands and said, we don't have a real solution. So we just build more emergency shelter. So we are inviting them into a permanent place to live indefinitely, surrounded by a supportive community. And then 2 of the homes are filled with what we call intentional neighbors. These are people that have a God-given calling and gift to live life alongside the formerly chronically homeless. So they give up their normal way of life, their 3-bedroom, 2-bath, picketed, fenced in yard, and they come and live in a tiny home, share the common house, and just have a faithful presence. It's kind of augmenting that role of family and inviting people into family games and meals and walks and celebrations, and then also just learning those things about our neighbors and doing life side by side. That was our first sacred settlement. We opened our second sacred settlement 6 weeks later on the heels of the first one. It's almost like once you shoot to the moon, then everyone else can kind of get to the moon too. So it was a lot of work to birth the first sacred settlement, and then less work to birth the second. Second sacred settlement is at could not be any different than the first one. It is at it's in a first ring suburb in a white affluent community. It's at an ELCA Lutheran church. Overall, the congregation is older, high wealth, retired. The church as a whole had been on the decline for the last 25 years, had a large endowment, had a beautiful piece of property that was all lakefront, and they said yes to their neighbors that were living in the city parks nearby and had no place to be. And what I love about the first two sacred settlements is that while they cannot be any different, urban, suburban, working class, high wealth, young families, older, retired, on the upswing, this 10-year-old kind of blossoming church plant. On the decline, this older mainline Lutheran church. It's so beautiful because it enriches the life of both congregations. Both congregations are seeing an increase in attendance, an increase in social interactions and deep engagement, an increase in tithing, and I believe that God is saying, I can do this anywhere where my people say yes to radical hospitality, and that's part of the reward of doing this, is that it is like a city on a hill. People will be attracted to the warmth and the light of this way of life, where we are no longer just preaching, but we're actually just living a shared way of life with the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and doing it in just a holistic way, where actually all of us are changed and refined and grow together.
Yeah. Now, how did you address some of the concerns, though? Because I bet you a lot of times when you're meeting with some of these churches for the first time, the neighbors or the church would say, hey, what about the crime? Or what about some of the concerns, some of the red flags? How do you guys address some of that? Or is it you're going to have to live with it? You're going to have to deal with it. May happen, it may not happen. How do you help these churches process through some of these questions?
Yeah. I mean, specifically to the question around the surrounding neighborhood and the not in my backyard sentiments, the NIMBY sentiments, I would say that the level of resistance that you're going to get from the neighborhood is in direct correlation to your relationship with that neighborhood. So if a church has done a really good job historically of knowing their neighborhood and serving their neighborhood and loving their neighborhood, then the neighborhood is going to trust them. At our first sacred settlement, the church had a heart for hospitality, and while they were only about 20 worshiping families, you could go and survey their neighborhood, and probably 50% of that neighborhood would say that that's their church. Even though they had never stepped into a Sunday service, they had been to so many block parties, so many, gatherings on the lawn of the church over the years, that they had felt connection to that church. And while maybe they were fearful about who the homeless are and what kind of neighbor the homeless are going to be, they trusted the church. They trusted that the church wasn't going to bring something harmful into their community. Now we're planting a sacred settlement at a third ring suburban church. It's a mega church. It's 50 acres, 350,000 square feet. It's in a very affluent community surrounded by, very high value homes. And they don't really know their neighborhood. They are a commuter church. And so part of the good refining work of planting a sacred settlement is God saying, you can't move forward until you love these neighbors. Like, I don't think we get to overcome the hateful neighbors. I don't think we get to, step over someone to help someone else. And so before we can plant a sacred settlement there, the church is doing the really good and hard work of earning the trust of their neighborhood. And I think that is just true kind of across the board. Planting a sacred settlement um, refines that local church in the way that they need to be refined. Every one of us, as an individual and also as a worshiping body, have superpowers and also super blind spots. And I think that God is, through the process of planting a sacred settlement, refining those blind spots, making them aware to us so that we can humble ourselves and yield ourselves to Him, but then also work through that and be a stronger community for it.
Have you gotten to a point where churches are now searching you, or how do you identify which are the best churches to work with?
Yeah. I think for a lot of years we'd be invited to go into a church and give a presentation. We'd be invited to adult forum or this or that. And the message that we were bringing was, hey, it's great if you do the coat drives. It's great if you do the food shelf. It's great if you go serve at the local shelter. But this isn't transformational. The transformational work is inviting the homeless, the familyless in and seeing them as brother, as sister, and and loving them indefinitely. And that was a hard message for the church to hear. And for a lot of years, I would give a presentation and it would just be crickets in the audience. It was really a hard message to hear. And I sort of joke that, the community would be like, thanks so much for coming, see you never. And we would never hear from that church again, and that was disappointing. It was challenging. There were a lot of really challenging years in this work where I really wrestled with God a lot and said, I'm not sure if your church is still alive. Like, the church doesn't have a heartbeat for the poor. They don't see their brother and sister in need and feel compelled to love them as they love themselves. We just continue to do charity and not life together. I would say it's only been in the past year that something has sort of been birthed and opened up, and we've started to connect with churches and communities that already have a heartbeat for this and have had it for a long time. And so now we're really starting to connect with like-hearted communities that already had an imagination and a desire to live in this way, and now we're just bringing a practical way for them to do it. And so we aren't doing a lot of we aren't going out and seeking churches. Churches are really being drawn to this work, and the work that we are doing is building a really thorough roadmap so that we can in a really thoughtful way, walk a congregation through all the work of planting a sacred settlement, from the conversations with their neighborhood, to the conversations and wrestling in their congregation, to the renovation of their land and their building, to conversations with their city and their regulators and their elected officials, but just really thoughtfully helping a church move through this process. And then for us, as we think about growth, is how do we walk multiple churches through this process at a time? And what might be lost in the intimacy of the one-on-one helping them, we believe will tenfold be gained by leaders of different sacred settlements learning from one another as we kind of go through this together. And so then now we're seeing kind of a national ecosystem of churches across the theological spectrum entering into a shared way of life with the poor and learning from one another, and just seeing, brighter and brighter cities on hills.
Yeah. Gabrielle, I mean, you're asking a key question that I'm asking. Next week, I head over to Resource Global in Orlando. We're going to be all in Orlando, and we're going to work on their strategic plan. Like, for you guys, as you start thinking national or even global, how do you decide what churches to work with? How do you decide what cities to work with? What's your framework or what you're thinking behind all this, Gabrielle?
Yeah. The first question that we ask a church to answer is, how would a sacred settlement enhance and fulfill your church's mission? So we need a church to be able to articulate and identify that a sacred settlement is not another ministry that they're adding. That it's that
Yeah,
it is actually the fruit bowl to hold everything that they are doing. This is going to shepherd a shared way of life for their congregation. Churches want to live in community. They want community. But I think that the church has forgotten how to do that. And so we just ask, you're already on mission. God has already given you, your local church, a specific mission. How do you see a sacred settlement enhancing that and fulfilling that mission? And I think we can just learn a lot from that. We're also asking, how are you already showing hospitality? So if all of their work is outreach, and none of it is come here, come into our building, come into our land. It's really just seeing how they're already caring for the poor in their community.
Mm.
Is it pity? Is it charity? Or is it empathy and compassion? We know that compassion means to suffer with. It means I'm going to come into this with you. I'm not just going to make the meal and give it to you. Maybe I'm going to invite you to make the meal with me. And if that's not possible, I'm going to make the meal and we're going to sit together and we're going to eat it together. And if they're not there at all, but they still have the imagination for it, then we start to say, start to know your neighbors on the streets. Start to meet them where they're at week after week and start to become a trusted person in their life. So it's never a no to any church. We'll work with any church that has the heart to do this. It's just identifying where they are on the journey and what things need to happen to get them to a place where it would be a fruitful and healthy place to bring very wounded and broken brothers and sisters to come and heal.
Yeah. For now, switching gears for yourself, what are you learning about yourself as a founder, as a president of this organization? What are you realizing about what you love doing and how God has wired you?
Yeah. I think I've had a desire for community my whole life. I remember being on a mission trip in Guatemala at 12 years old and singing the song, I want to be your hands, I want to be your feet, I'll go where you send me. Like, you have my life, use me. And I always wanted a fluid way of life. I was never interested in just having like a career and then a church family and then my service and outreach and then my home life. Like, I wanted it all to be so seamless, where church and family and work and service, you couldn't really identify what was what. And I am learning that to really have that authentically means that there is no hiding. Like, there is no hiding any of my my sin. It's there's 1,000 mirrors around me that are showing me the blind spots. And while that is incredible and super refining, and it forces me to to grow, it's super painful. Like, I feel like I'm walking through the refining fire every week. And God's like, okay, let's walk through that fire again. I'm like, oh, so painful. Do we really have to do the fire again? But the heartbeat is, don't leave me this way. Like, don't leave me the way I am. Like, make me more and more and more like you, Jesus. I
Mm.
don't want to stay this way. I even though my flesh absolutely wants to hide all my sin in darkness, being in community and being a leader in community means that it's exposed, it's out there, and that is like, that's his kindness and his mercy and his goodness to me, because it means he's not leaving me the same. Like, I am being refined daily.
Yeah. Gabriel, I'm also for you, similar to you. I'm also dealing with another thing. I'm dealing with is expectations. That Lord, if I continue to serve you, I have a certain set of expectations in which I want you to deliver. And what happens if he doesn't deliver in the way that I want him to deliver? Am I
Sure.
going to deal with disappointment? Am I going to deal with frustration? Or am I willing to come before the Lord and say, Lord, I trust you.
Yeah.
I accept what you're giving me. It may not be what I want. It may not be what I expect,
Yeah.
but I need to trust you,
Yeah.
whether it's in the area of finance or funding or even deliverables, all of those things. I'm learning how to deal with all those things.
Yeah. Yeah. How are you doing it? Would you have some sage wisdom?
The only thing I would encourage you that I really learned throughout it is during my cancer journey. And when I had my 4 centimeter tumor in my nose
Wow.
and it destroyed the inside of my mouth, Gabrielle, the doctor says you're going to have to mentally be okay with the fact that you're going to live with pain for 10 weeks. And I lived with pain for 10 weeks. It destroyed the inside of my mouth to the point where I couldn't swallow food and I had to suck food through a straw for 10 weeks. I lived with so much pain. And I remember sitting there one night, it was raining, and I was just on my rocking chair by the window. And there was a voice that says, Huh, so is this the God that you're serving? So
Mm,
is this the God that you've been
mm,
given into and dedicating your whole life? Where has that gotten you?
yeah.
And Gabriel, I then realized I cannot trust my heart. My heart was sinful.
Yeah.
And then I have to meditate
Yeah.
on his words day and night,
Yeah.
where he says that he loves me, that he is there for me, that he is my steadfast strength. I had to understand the words of scripture
Yeah.
and understand the truth and trust that the truth would guide me. I had to really work through some of those things
Yeah.
versus trusting my heart. That was the only way. And every single day, I had to choose to trust those words
Yeah.
every single day. And here I am sitting here. I have no saliva. I have no taste buds, and my head just pounds every day. And every day I have to wake up trusting him.
That's incredible. Yeah. That's incredible. I don't think we're
Yeah.
choosing an easy life when we choose to follow him. We're choosing an intimate life. Like, his presence is
Mm.
the reward. He's the reward. We want him, we want to be drawn closer and closer and closer to his heart. And yeah, the external things, the natural things, maybe uh bring pressures that just bring us closer to him. I think
Yeah.
he speak why does he speak in a whisper? Like, he wants us to come close,
Yes.
right? And
Correct. 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 Correct.
and that's the gift. It's like, God, keep whispering and help me to quiet the temptations, the pain, the suffering, the accusations, the shame. Like, all of those voices are so loud. Help me to quiet those so
Yeah.
that I can hear your voice. I can hear your whisper.
Yeah. 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 And I love your reference to Elijah because he could have appeared in fire. He could have appeared in the earthquake, all of those things. But he came to Elijah in this whisper.
Yeah.
And it was his grace as, Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
And Gabrielle, that gives me strength. I love your illustration with Elijah. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Talk to me as we start wrapping up because we're going to have multiple conversations again about journey, life, lessons. I love talking with you. Talk to me a little bit about what you're learning about George Mueller and how he has influenced your life.
Yeah. For context, George Mueller is, a faithful servant in the 1800s that really housed tens of thousands of orphans. And his philosophy was to never ask people for what he needed, but to only go to God. Tell God what he needed, and trust that God was big enough and not only not only able but willing, right? The words of Jesus, like I'm willing and able um, to supply all your needs. And um, there's a ton of pressure running a nonprofit to we were talking about this earlier, to make payroll. We've got 10 people working for us.
Mhm.
There are households that fully depend on their paycheck at Settled. And yet, in some ways, that pressure feels not necessarily authentic. Like they aren't dependent on Settled. We are all dependent on him. We all know that to be true, every one of us. But I think that there's two ways of really going about fundraising, and both require a lot of work. You can either be out there hustling to meet with donors and share your story and make the correct asks and do enough research about them that you can know what the appropriate ask is, and make sure that you do the follow-ups and hire a development director. And that is work. That is a lot of work. And I don't discredit any Christian nonprofits that are going down that road. But in a quiet time, in a whisper, I heard God say, there's another way. You doing the work of coming and quieting yourself before me, and let's build deep and intimate trust so that you trust me to run the organization,
Mm-hmm.
to fund the work that you need, to supply all of your needs according to my riches and glory. And that's work too. It's just a different type of work, and I feel like he's invited me into that work
Mm-hmm.
of doing that deep heart work. I a couple months back, things looked a little bleak, and I was crying out to God, and I was like,
Yeah.
the enemy of my soul was coming to me and saying, you made a terrible mistake. Like, you have so much lack. Like, this is not the way that it's supposed to be. You should have been out there hustling and drumming up, funding for the organization instead of spending time with the Lord. And I heard the accusation, and I came to the Lord, and I'm like, Lord, is this true? Like, did I mess up? Is this not your way? And I heard him say, with this way, it doesn't mean that it's always going to look like there's abundance. There always is abundance, but the circumstance and feelings won't always appear as though there's abundance. Sometimes I want you to sit at the table, surrounded by hundreds of orphan children that are ready for breakfast, and thank me for what's not on the table. And trust me that I'm going to supply in that space, that I am a good father. I am a good provider. And then when you have fully surrendered yourself, not to the circumstance, but just to me, the knock comes at the door. And the milk carton has broken down outside of the orphanage. And the baker was prompted by the Holy Spirit the night before to get up early and bake dozens of rolls for the orphans. And everyone eats. And I said, Lord, could it be a different way? Could I not have to ever sit down at an empty table? Could you always supply more than what we need at Settled and let us always be able to see that? And he said, no. I'm building a deep and enduring trust in you. And it's important that you know me, that you know my voice, that you know my character, when the table is empty, and know that I'm still God and I'll still provide, and trust however it comes. And so that is, it's a challenging walk, but it's worth it. It's worth knowing him that much more. And yeah, it's a journey with him, right? All of this is a journey with him, and the reward is him. The reward is his presence.
Yeah. Hey, thank you very much for coming on. I learned so much from you. I learned so much as you shared all of those things. We're going to have you on because I loved. Thank you so much for just teaching and encouraging me, even as I sat under you today listening to you.
Thank you. You encouraged me today. This was such a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, if people are interested in more about Settled and about yourself, is there a website? Is there places where they can follow what you guys are doing?
Yeah. Our website is settled.org. settled.org. Yeah. And that will lead you to all the different places. Instagram and Facebook and whatever else. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. We're going to have to talk soon, all right?
So good. Thank you, Tommy.